Here, I want to extract all the juice that I can from the last 30 minutes of my Adderall this morning. So I did not watch Kamala Harris's interview. In fact, I have not watched any of the clips because I almost never watch politician speeches nor interviews. I may occasionally watch Donald Trump clips when they're boosted as being particularly funny, but I just have no interest in general in hearing politicians speak because the incentives are rigged so heavily for them only to provide a filtered and deceptive oration. But the Commentary Magazine podcast is so good, all right? And I say this with disbelief because I am not politically aligned with John Podhoretz, Commentary Magazine, Matthew Continetti, but their podcast is so good. I just had to listen for 5 minutes and I was inspired to go live once again and talk about what they were talking about. So I listened to Mark Halperin last night and this morning, and he said that the Kamala Harris interview was wasted because Dana, and it's not Dana Bash, it's Dana. So if you have a name that is typically pronounced one way, and yet you insist on having it pronounced another way, how incumbent is it upon other people to accommodate you? I say it's nice when they do, and the more often they interact with you, right, the more they should be incentivized to pronounce your name correctly. But if you insist on having a name pronunciation that is completely different from 99% of other Danas, then other people can be forgiven for not feeling like accommodating your need to feel special. And Kamala Harris has often mispronounced her own name. Her supporters mispronounce her name. So yes, it is the civil thing to do to pronounce other people's names correctly, but when other people insist on a unique pronunciation, okay, it exacts something from you. And civility always exacts something from you. But Kamala Harris mispronounced Dana Bash's name, and she always had to pause before saying Dana because her natural inclination was to say Dana. But what I was struck from the Commentary Magazine podcast this morning, which was recorded last night immediately after the interview went to air, is that they labeled the interview dreary, which seems to fit with the other commentary that I've seen. So when you get one word or one idea that seems to encapsulate and just sum up in a beautiful, simple way, that's something to celebrate. And so dreary seems like it's the best word for Kamala Harris's interview last night with Dana Bash. And then the other word they used was deceptive. And they mentioned that Tim Walz is such a practiced, easy liar. Right? He has charm, right? He is unself-conscious, and he just unself-consciously and infectiously lies a lot like Bill Clinton. Right? If you had any sympathy for Bill Clinton, you just kind of went along with his lies because the guy was just so likable. And if you like Donald Trump, you forgive his lies. But Tim Walz is an exceptionally good liar. And it contrasts with Kamala Harris, who's just so unsure of herself. All right, I love it when one word can just encapsulate someone. And this is the word that I was tagged with. So I have some familiarity with this topic. When I moved to America in May of 1977, I was 11 years old, May 28, 1977, when we moved to Pacific Union College in the Napa Valley from Australia. And once I entered sixth grade that fall, the most common word used to describe me was insecure. And Californians were much more psychologically sophisticated than Australians. Now, I believe Australians have just as many therapists. psychologists, psychiatrists per capita as Americans. Though psychotherapy is still not as widespread, socially acceptable in Australia, certainly not in regional Australia. That means country Australia. And among working class Australians, psychotherapy is not as acceptable, but still, I think overall not quite as acceptable in Australia as it is in America. 12-step programs, not as socially acceptable in Australia as in America. But anyway, I was tagged with the word insecure, and that was the best word to describe me. So it's useful to have one word that describes somebody's through line. So someone can thrash around from devoting all their energy into athletics. And so for years, I ran marathons. Well, for about a year. And then I devoted myself for years to the performance of journalism. And then I decided to get a PhD in economics. And then I decided to give my life to God and make the case for ethical monotheism as Dennis Prager had outlined it. And then I wrote a book and an internet column about the pornography industry. And then I became an Alexander Technique teacher. And then I focused a near daily live stream on the alt-right. Right, so through all of these different manifestations, right, what's the through line? And the through line is this desperate need for significance and excitement. And so many of my pathologies were largely solved just by getting medicated for ADHD. But they're a manifestation of this underlying emptiness, insecurity, this desperate need to feel significant because one naturally lacks the human connections, the human ties, the relationships with friends, family, community that normal people have. So when you don't have that level of human connection, right, you're going to feel empty and insecure and desperate for excitement and meaning and significance. And so you're going to thrust off like a rocket in many different directions. You are going to turn like an indoor plant towards the sun, looking for life-sustaining attention. And so I recognize that dominant quality is the through line in my life. And I recognize that through line in the life of Richard Spencer. And I recognize that through line in the life of Kamala Harris. Right? Insecure is the best single word to describe her. She can be phenomenally prepared or completely unprepared. She can be gracious or a bitch. Right? She can have many different manifestations of who she really is, but at core, this is a highly insecure woman who's not as smart as her sister, not as educated as her sister, and who has this desperate need for significance to try to fill up this empty, insecure inner core. And that came out in the interview last night. She was halting. She was saying words, but they didn't resonate. When someone speaks the truth, right, you feel as though the molecules in the air around you are changed, right? The hair on the back of your neck stands up. You become more alive when someone says an unexpected truth. I learned this from my writing teacher, Terry Silverman. She made that point, and I've adopted it as a great point, right? You come alive when people are raw and honest, and they express an unexpected, unpopular, courageous truth, right? It fills you with more courage. And listening to Kamala Harris's interview, as I understand it, it did not carry with it these qualities, right? She said words, but they did not touch the core of who she is. And so effective communication means that your words and your actions seem to flow out of who you really are in a particular situation, right? Who you really are in a football huddle or a broadcast booth or a kitchen or in bed with your wife is going to depend, right? It's going to express itself differently. Hey, thank you. Good Shabbos. But when people speak from that true, authentic part of themselves, right, it moves you. It captures you, right? It puts you at ease. Right? Do you know people who are insecure and they want you to tell them who they are? And that's tiring. And they're going to feel driven to provoke you. And so other people will have to set limits on them, which is also very tiring. And I've gone through my life provoking other people, pushing them to set limits on me so that I could find out who I am and what is acceptable, judging from other people's reactions. And that just tires people out. I've just gone through my life testing and provoking people. And Kamala Harris is that same emptiness, this quest to find out who she is. She has no core. She seems empty and vacuous. And the words that she says in an interview, they don't seem to relate to who she is. Now, I think she's got good speechwriters, and I think she's got a brilliant team behind her, a team that is increasingly at odds, as all of Kamala Harris's teams have been at odds. Low levels of cohesion, low levels of trust, lots of infighting. There's a stunning op-ed in The Union, a small newspaper out of Nevada County, California, which is right next to where I lived for about 12 years, between 1980 and 1994. Spent 12 of those 14 years living in Placer County, which is next to Nevada County. So this local politician talks about his son spending a 1-month internship with Kamala Harris's office, and it was just awful, right? The way that she would verbally abuse her staff, how she would make them all line up and say, "Good morning, General," when she walks into work, how they're not allowed to look at her directly, and how she displayed no appreciation for their efforts. And Kamala Harris's staff have never lasted very long, right? She's a terrible manager. And even though she's got brilliant people working for her, right, her terrible management skills are showing up yet again as her team is increasingly at odds. There's no clear lines of authority. People don't know who's really in charge. It's getting pulled in different directions. And these are brilliant people, right? She's imported the smartest, most effective political operators from Barack Obama's team and combined them with some people from Biden's team, combined them with her sister, and they're all over the place. And so my suspicion is that the more America gets to know Kamala Harris over the next 67 days, right, the more likely it is that the undecideds and the independents will side against her, particularly men. They're going to break against her in the battleground states. I have no doubt that overall the team is more politically astute, sophisticated, seasoned than Donald Trump's team, which is led by brilliant operators. But I still think that Kamala Harris's team has more sophistication and expertise and brilliance. But because Kamala is just bad at running things. Now, Donald Trump is not good at running things either. But Kamala Harris is even worse at running things. And quite a contrast with Joe Biden, who was effective in passing legislation. Oh, that's there's this media and academic fixation that greatness in politics is primarily exhibited through passing legislation. And so by this measure, Joe Biden has been a great president because he's passed so much significant legislation. But often legislation makes things worse, right? There's absolutely no automatic correlation between passing legislation and improving a situation, but there's a pro-government action bias in the news media and in the academy that consistently praises and sides with big government politicians who can pass legislation. But Biden was able to pass legislation And he had a White House that leaked less than any other White House prior to his disastrous June 27 debate with Donald Trump. They'd been with him a long time, and they worked together smoothly. And the Biden White House did give off the appearance of a smooth professional organization. Now, it's been an absolute disaster getting us into unnecessary conflicts in Europe, over Ukraine and the Middle East, over the Israel versus Gaza war. But it has seemed smooth and professional, because even though he is pretty ruthless with his staff and often abusive to his staff, he's still engendered sufficient loyalty among key members of his team that they have served him for many years. And that's completely different from Kamala Harris. Right? She doesn't have anyone who has served her for a long time, because nobody can stand working for Kamala Harris for very long. Even her sister only works with her intermittently. Oh, great John McWhorter op-ed in the New York Times, The Real Meaning of Joy. And John McWhorter makes the point that if the Democrats had as their nominee Karen Bass or Michelle Obama or any other black politician, you'd still have this invocation of the politics of joy, right? Politics of joy means the Democrats, they have a black candidate, right? The Democrats have overwhelmingly become dominated by the black faction of their party. And you get the politics of joy when they get their candidate in the show. Barack Obama, and now Kamala Harris, right? Who had a father from Jamaica who was mixed race, approximately half of African descent and half of Irish descent. And she had an Indian mother. So Kamala Harris is approximately 1/4 black, but she's the black candidate. And that's what the joy is all about. Joy is a euphemism for the Democrats have a black candidate. And that gives the most boisterous section of their party joy, understandably so. But when the news media talks about joy, when it's just taken unironically that Kamala Harris is a campaign of joy, simply a campaign based on having a black candidate. That's it. There's no deeper significance. We've got one of our own on top running the show, and this gives us a feeling that's good. We feel seen, we feel represented, we're going to represent. And so joy simply means black. And I never thought of that, right? I was completely unaware of that till I read John McWhorter's column in the New York Times.